On this channel, I'm known as Brad's brother, and it is another Rhythms of Grace for this Wednesday. Thank you for allowing me to be on this channel. It was so good to meet many of you a couple of Sundays ago there in Homosassa Springs. I hope all is well with you, and it was just great to be among you and be there at Nature Coast, and I love it every time I'm there. So again, thanks for allowing me to be here. Rhythms of Grace is a devotional that we do every day, or just about every day here on this channel. And I typically do Tuesday, but today I'm doing Wednesday, and so I hope that's okay with you as well. Wednesdays here in Los Fresnos, I'm pastor of the Table of Los Fresnos here in Texas, and every Wednesday we have our weekly Bible study. And our Bible study is at Mario's. We call it Jesus and Tacos. And typically we talk about whatever I preached on Sunday. And so we just kind of carry that over, and we just basically, we spend an hour just discussing it over lunch. And this week we were in Matthew 16. If you know anything about Matthew 16, it's one of the most controversial passages in all of the Bible. In fact, it's been controversial for about 2,000 years. And it has a lot to do with what Jesus is saying to Peter. And we're not going to get into that today much at all. It's hard to avoid it, but we're not going to really get into the controversy. But there is something I want to point out. Jesus is having a conversation with his disciples, his best friends, and Jesus raises a subject he hasn't raised before. At least in the New Testament, this is the first time this subject is raised. And so we don't have, it's possible he had a conversation with them and he uses this word or this idea. It's possible that he did that, but we don't have a record of it. So for all we know, this is the first time they're hearing it as well. Again, we don't know that to be true as conversations go, but this is what Matthew has recorded for his audience. He wants his audience to hear what this conversation is about. And in this conversation, Jesus has asked them a couple of questions. Who do people say that I am? And Matthew is writing his book. He writes his biography of Jesus, the first biography we have in our New Testaments. And he is writing to his audience about 30 or 40 years after Jesus has gone into the heavens to be at the right hand of the Father. And he's writing them because they have some questions. They have some doubts. And so in this conversation that Jesus is having in Matthew 16, Jesus raises the questions that Matthew's audience is asking. And Jesus asks his best friends, who are people saying that I am? Who do people say that I am? And the disciples, they give him some answers. Some people say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, some say you're Jeremiah, and then they list off a bunch of other prophets. But then Jesus, he's really after something else. He wants to hear it from them. Who do you say that I am? And Peter then says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's a great confession. Again, we're not going to get into why all the hows. It's what's. It's a great confession. Peter's known as Peter the Confessor because he says this at this moment. It's one of the greatest confessions of faith of all time. He's confessing the gospel. It's in its pure form. It's in its simplest form. But this is gospel. It's what Jesus says after that. I mean, that's controversial in and of itself because they are saying something that nobody in that day, at least yet, is saying. Jesus is the Messiah. He's the promised one of the Old Testament. He's the one we've been waiting for. But then Jesus says, his response to Peter is what people have been fighting for over 2,000 years. He says, yes, Peter, you've said correctly. And this was revealed to you by the Father. You didn't come up with this on your own. Then he says this, you're Peter, and on this rock, and that's where all the controversy comes in. We're not going to get into all that. But he says this, I will build my church. That's the phrase we're going to look at just for a couple of seconds. I will build my church. I will build my church. And as I think about that, again, that's the first time the word church is used in the New Testament. We don't know if it's the first time Jesus has used it. It was a common word in those days. It means gathering or assembly. And in fact, many of their popular assemblies were called church. But he says, I'm going to build my church, which means his church is a little different. And what makes it different is it's going to be built on Peter's confession, a confession that is being proclaimed. You're the Messiah, and you're the Son of the living God. So he's going to build his church, his assembly, on Peter's confession, Peter's proclamation of who Jesus is. But I want to look at, I will build my church. And I bring it up because church, for many people, is a dirty word. In fact, just last year, a couple years ago, the studies indicate that over the last 30 years, people's opinion of church has dropped. There's multiple reasons for it. More than 2/3 of Americans don't trust church. 32% of Americans say they trust church. That is slightly up from 2022. That's slightly up by 1 percentage point. It's 31%, so it was even lower. But it's at the lowest of all time. Trust in church. And by the way, pastors are at 32% as well. I mean, the pastors are no better. It's way down there. So people don't trust church. So church is a dirty word. So Jesus is saying, I will build my church. And I wonder what do you think? What do you think of when you hear Jesus say that? Because the church that we've been involved with, or the church that we've had, or the church that we've experienced, we don't like. And when I talk about the myriads of reasons for people that don't like church, they've left the church. In fact, here in Los Fresnos, we're trying to reach people that used to go to church and aren't going to church anymore. All the reasons that people say, and some of the reasons that you can bring up in your head. You're back in church, but the church you've experienced is not anything to be desired. You didn't want church. You didn't like it. Something bad happened. Somebody treated you. By the way, when people say they don't trust the church and they give their reasons, I believe them. I've been in too many conversations where all the reasons are dismissed. And that's kind of like blaming the victim. No, the reasons are real. And I always want to make sure that we understand that when we talk about church, that we're hearing people. And when then they say, I don't like church because somebody did me wrong, something happened, I got hurt, I got burned, I lost family members, I lost this, I lost that. Those are real. And there's nothing to be dismissed. But then we come back to Jesus saying, I will build my church. I want you to hear this, regardless of what you think about church, regardless of what I feel. I mean, because I've been in some of these same situations. I say often, I'm shocked that I'm still in church. I want you to hear this. Jesus is saying, I will build my church. That's a promise, all right? That's a promise. He is promising that he is going to build his church. His church is different, he's saying, but he's going to build his church. It's not Bresson's church. It's not your church. It's not anybody else's church. It's Jesus' church. And he's going to be the one to do it. But he's making a promise to you. So whatever you've experienced in church, just know that that's not his plan. And it's easy for me to sit here and say that after all the garbage and crap that you've been through. I understand. I want you to hear Christ's promise. And the reason I bring this up, the reason I'm saying this, church is an assembly, church is a gathering. And Jesus considers it important. But you know why he considers it important? Because he wants to spend time with you and me. That's what keeps me connected to church. I realize, I say here, when I hear Jesus say, I will build my church, that's Jesus' promise to us, that he wants to be with us, wants to be with us. has to be with us. He died in order to be with us, in order to spend the rest of your life with you, in order to spend the rest of eternity with you. He doesn't want it any other way. He died to make it happen. So I will build my church is his promise to you that no matter what you've experienced, you're still part of his church. He's still going to make sure you're part of his people and that you're always in his people. He always has you. He always has me. So I want you to hear, I will build my church that way. Again, doesn't erase all the stuff that's happened, doesn't erase all the experiences you've had. But I pray that at Nature Coast, that you are experiencing church in a meaningful way. I pray that that's the case. I pray that that happens at the table. When Jesus is saying, I will build my church, that he is giving us his promise. And so we go to church and we receive from Jesus everything he wants, his grace, his love, his life, his forgiveness, all of that. Whenever we're in church, he's giving us of himself. He wants us to have it. He wants to be with us. And I'll go as far to say is he's not happy. Again, we're never gonna disappoint. Jesus is never disappointed with us. But I can say he wants to be with you and wants to be with me. Hear that. And I will build my church. That is today's rhythm of grace. He's always gracing us through word and sacrament. And that's how he's giving us his love. That's how he's giving us his forgiveness. Word and sacrament. That's how we know that he loves us. And so I encourage you this Sunday to think about that, regardless of what church has been for you or done to you. That this is his rhythms of grace for you. I will build my church. Have a good evening. And again, I encourage you, if you've got some questions, leave them here in the comment section and we'll answer them for you. But I absolutely love spending time here on your channel. Thank you so much and have a great rest